I'm Eliyah Stern, and I worked on writing the songs as well as editing the scene audio and collaborating a bit on writing the scenes.
Hi, my name is Josh, and I was one of the two main writers, along with Eden Sweet, who is at summer camp and can't be with us today, but I know that she enjoyed being a part of this as much as we all did.
Hi, I'm Max Rubin. I was the one in charge of the music audio, so mixing and mastering of the audio. I also, at points in time, was doing was working with Eliyah, just listening over, like being a second set of ears.
My name is Sarah Shapiro. I'm the vocal music teacher at Milken, and one of the classes I teach is Advanced Kol Echad that Eliyah, Max, and Eden were all students in, and I was the music advisor / editor for the musical.
And I am Sarah Figoten. I'm the acting teacher and theater director at the upper school. And similarly to Ms. Shapiro, I teach advanced theater projects, and Josh is my faithful student. And so I was here helping develop the story for the musical.
Well, I can't say, to be honest, that I legitimately remember the exact way that we formed.
I actually do. Oh
Ooh,
God.
do tell.
So what ended up happening was, I remember something like, I think it was actually like a year ago now. I had been writing in my journals, and I was like, this would be a cute love story. And it was nothing like this, but I brought it up to Eliyah, and then Ms. Shapiro had already asked us, well, guys, do you guys want to write a musical for your Advanced Kol Echad project? And we were like, yes. And Eliyah and I very quickly realized this is going to not work with that story because it's way too complicated and gives too many questions. So we started moving over towards what we have now, Living with a Stranger, which is amazing. And then we tacked on members like, and Eden was there as well. And she joined us, and then Josh joined because we weren't sure if we could have like a joint thing. But I'm glad everyone was a part of it, because that I think that's completely what made it what it was. Because this story kind of has like a bit of every single one of our inputs to it, at least at some point. And that's something really meaningful and special.
I will say from our end, at the beginning of this school year, we really had no idea what was going to be possible in terms of, doing a school musical. We were still at home quarantining, but not a lot of musicals rights had been made available for filming at home, for doing a movie, which we were eventually able to do with Spamalot. And when Fig and I first started talking about bringing our two classes together to work on this project, we actually thought that maybe this would be the school musical for the year. But for 100 reasons, first of all, just the enormity of the task and putting that on the shoulders of students, as well as, wanting to make sure that these students could write something that was true to them without necessarily needing to please the larger school audience, which can be really tricky when selecting a musical. We ended up doing a separate musical as our school musical, but really the impetus for starting this project was the insanity of being at home, being quarantined, and wanting to find a way to do this project, to do our Advanced Kol Echad and advanced theater projects in a way that might end up being constructive for our whole school community.
Throughout the whole project, we've definitely learned that communication is absolutely crucial.
On my end, I was just so impressed that like every week we would come back and work had been done. And so the students were meeting independently together, working on their own, and continuing to develop the story. And we just continued to like peel it away a piece at a layer at a time, and read through sections of it, refine that, bigger chunks, then refine that, and just over and I mean, when you're developing new work, it's just rewriting forever is basically the way that it goes.
Yeah, and I suppose also that kind of the main way that we were able to progress, but just between the weeks, was that there was individual work, obviously, but then after we would have like a first draft of either lyrics or dialogue, we would kind of check in with each other and have someone maybe from a different component proofread that and see what they thought, just about like the story in general, just because we're all working on the story together, but also to make sure that if there was something we wanted to put in the songs, that it didn't come from nowhere out of the scene, or that maybe something in the scene, the emotions expressed didn't necessarily align with what we had, and did now we have to change something. And so kind of each being each other's proofreaders, to be able to both have that consistency, but also just to be able to collaborate on the whole thing and just help each other out, and to help each other be able to progress once we've started our own individual stuff.
At a lot of those moments where you are trying to get something done and then the technology gets in the way, making for some really, really funny moments, even though, yes, they're kind of frustrating, we find our ways to work around that. And that's actually, in my opinion, the gratifying parts for me. Like where we like have all these tech issues, but figure out a way to work around it in spite of it. We want to move everything. Well, it won't let us do that if we click and drag. We'll have to, I don't know, like we'll have to cut it and then paste it in this really, really weird way, and then like change all these individual timings. Like sometimes it increased the amount of work, but it like the way that we had to like minimize that was, it was part of the job.
I'll say that I really enjoy kind of creating and telling stories, characterization, creating these people. And so I guess on the broad side of things, that it was really fun to work on just the original creation aspect of this, and sitting down, writing out, picking names together, and kind of creating the individual details of these characters. And he's not a bar mitzvah DJ. It got really close. It got really close. But like coming up with the different occupations and relationships between the characters.
I'll write a show about a bar mitzvah DJ. Okay, that's
Pig, that's you and me. You and me are gonna write that show.
Okay.
Copyright.
Stay tuned, everybody.
See, the thing was, we'd be discussing this, and then the other part of this, which was probably the most entertaining things to me, was the annotations that happened when we're working on this. For one, when trying to come up with something that I don't even remember what I was trying to rhyme it with, but all I could think of was no. That's a separate thing. I will discuss that. But I can't remember what I was trying to rhyme with it. But all I can think of was oy vey, because we had been discussing the bar mitzvah DJ idea the entire day. And so that was all I can think of as a rhyme. But we would be trying to write lyrics, and Josh and I were trying to come up with we were all trying to come up with some rhymes or whatever. And the annotation, which stayed on there until I sadly had to take it off very much at the end just to submit it, was... I believe we're trying to rhyme something with "I'll love again," and then in the annotation on the sheet music, "Hallelujah, it's raining men," and that stayed on there the entire process. Just different annotations like that, or even on the spreadsheet, because we'll be writing notes about our progress on things, and it will likely come, especially mine, after I am tired, and just my brain is having processed a lot of information already. So we'll just be writing random things on our notes, something about Christmas. I'll be writing like, "Oh ho ho, it's finally done," and we'll turn it into "ho ho ho." Like, I don't know our thought processes at the end of the work days, but it came out with some great annotations, so those are always fun.
I have a question for you guys. So I'm assuming that this is the first time that you've developed new work. I think it was my last semester in college. That was the first time that I had directed a new piece, and it is such a different process than a normal, being an actor in a show. And so I'm just kind of curious to hear about, like, what was your experience to be the one actually like making the story for the first time, and the frustrations and the pride in it? I mean, it's really cool. It's cool to create something from nothing.
I can start with this. My concern was like creating it with other people, because for me, like, I've been able to write something. Like I wrote this story about two teenagers who accidentally open a portal to hell and meet Satan, because that's where my brain goes. And I did that by myself. And I was like, how am I gonna write a musical with these other people? So when Eden and I started to write the first scene together, like I was nervous, like, are we gonna be able to come up with something? Our thought process is gonna be very different. And we actually thought about writing in very similar ways, which allowed us to like write the first drafts of scenes separately and then edit them together, because we had similar thought processes on how the story should unfold and all that. And then the trickier part was just making sure like continuity lined up with the songs that Eliyah and Max were working on. I remember she and I sat down, Eliyah and I, to figure out the scene 5 with Jesse's song, to figure out like the placement of that and like when certain things had to be said. Because like I'd written the first scene where the song would come at the end, and then she wrote the scene where the song came in the middle. So which is where we ended up, but we had to just like figure out which versions of the stuff we were going to go with and whose dialogue we would go with and all of that.
I suppose from like the acting perspective, for me, when we're doing theater productions, when finding out my character and kind of reading through my lines, I always tend to try and look at the lines and see, how would this character just respond to things normally? How as a person would they react to different situations, and what would come naturally? And so in characterization and trying to write these kind of reactions to these situations, kind of doing the same thing and trying to make it seem natural, trying not to make it seem like just lines that are written down, but kind of working on natural flow and natural human reactions and like internal conflicts to these kinds of things. And so I think in terms of how that blends in with just my prior performing arts experience, that it was having to actually do the writing first to make it come natural and to make them like real people, because we're not just portraying them, we're writing them. And so I think also the multiple perspectives did definitely help with that, just seeing different way, because even just in daily life, we'll phrase things differently, we'll speak differently, and it sounds normal to different people. Some things we say, I swear to God.
What was that one thing? I was reading a character that Eliyah had written, and it was a phrase that I had never said in my life before. What was it?
It was yo.
Yo. Oh. Yo, and I just felt like a 90-year-old like a grandmother trying to say yo.
It's like, yeah, it's those kinds of things where I'll say something and I just say it normally, but it wouldn't necessarily translate as a normal pattern of speech for other people or for the characters we're writing. And so having each other kind of check in on what sounds like human speech and what sounds like the next proper response to things. That was
definitely tracking through like the intentions of the characters really carefully and making sure that like their responses to each other made sense. And it's, as I said, like constantly kind of peeling back that. Eliyah, I'm curious, and Max too, since you guys were the kind of the main foragers of the music side of it, like taking those intentions and then turning them into music, like what was that process like?
I will say one of my favorite parts about working on this show was that you guys would come and you would have melodies and most of the words, and you'd be like, oh yeah, we're still figuring this part out. And you'd have, when it came to the instrumental section, I feel like that was where I got to actually help you a lot, was like figuring out the harmonizations, figuring out the texture of the instrumentalization. And it was really fun for me when I'm like, well, we could do it this way. And this is kind of like imitating Jason Robert Brown style. And this way is like imitating Stephen Sondheim style. And this is like more rock and roll style. And sometimes you'd be like, oh no, not that one. And somebody would be like, yes, something like that. And like seeing it all like kind of click together with like the music helping to tell the story. And also I loved when I would come and say like, okay, I see what you're doing here, but then you do something totally different here, and we have to bridge that, or we need to bring back that motif, or we need a musical, the music, the feeling of the music needs to match that.
That I feel like it came out really well. I'm really proud of how the character was written by writers and shaped by our music, and so like to eventually get to a place where it's like, where what we wrote elicited something so raw in me is like I'm just really proud of everyone.
If I can just add to that a bit, yeah, I think that these characters really allowed us to it gave the perspective of looking at relationships between people and kind of seeing how that works, what parts of that have we experienced ourselves, and how those different relationships relate to where we are in our own lives with our own friends and those around us. And if we were in those character situations, how would we want to react? And to some degree, there were some moments where we're writing it where it's like, yes, I know this feeling well. How do I want to portray this in this character? And kind of, there were parts where like similar situations had been happening. And so there was almost a comparison while writing this between kind of my real life emotions and these characters' emotions, and or wanting to also for Kate or Jesse to want to be on that caring side of things. I don't know whether it's just me when I tend to write characters. I sometimes get attached to them and then want to if you see like a character suffering, you don't want that to necessarily keep happening. And so it's kind of through these characters, writing help for those characters while still keeping in the integrity of that characterization. Because Kate, as much as we would want to be the kind of like perfect form of help, we still have to keep in mind that that isn't the case necessarily, and that there's that balance between what we want to give to the characters and what the characters themselves are able to give.
And then them starting to bounce off each other too. Then they kind of start to live and you see their dynamic. And so I think that's it kind of like lifts off the page at a certain point, which is really cool. Yeah. I was going to say that it was a really interesting process because you guys landed on not only a subject matter that luckily none of us had lived through, but also that your characters were all older than you are. And so there was this, it's been a really interesting process, like hearing the ways in which you were bringing your own perspective to it. And then also moments where like Shap or I had to go like, oh, okay, so like when you have a roommate, that's not how it works. And bring a little more lived experience, that perspective to the mix as well. But I think that considering there was this kind of age gap between you and the characters, that the people that you created feel very 3D to me. So it's impressive. For me as an artist, like starting to develop work was the most empowering thing that I had ever experienced. And I'm lucky that in my high school environment, like students were able to direct and costume design, and it was a very comprehensive and hands-on experience. And so tasking students with developing a musical, it's a big undertaking. And just going like, what happens if you say yes to this? And then seeing everything that's come out of it is so fulfilling. And I'm hopeful that this isn't the last time that any of you will write something.
For me, the writing part of the musical that we did, it allowed me to like funnel all of the insecurities and fears that I had back in September and October, and just like funnel them into these characters that were meant to be insecure and afraid and all that. Like scene 4, when Daniel is having not necessarily a breakdown, but he's just like getting upset that he hasn't been able to remember everything. I remember that was like the second or third scene that I wrote. And so that was like still when things were very uncertain. We didn't know when vaccines were coming. So I was just like, it took me like 30 minutes to complete a first draft of that scene. And I was impressed that I did it, and I'm impressed that it stayed as unchanged as it did.
I think that for me, that maybe one of the biggest things was emotional shifts. whether in the dialogue or in the songs, that it can be hard to share your feelings, but seeing how these feelings gradually change throughout these characters and being able to put those experiences into words and to explain those emotions and to flesh those out, I think was a big thing for me. Since whenever I'm writing characters, I like to see them grow, and I like to see how they are and how they're feeling, and then see how that changes, and kind of as they're thinking through things, see how that changes. And I think that especially adding that personal lens in throughout that process, whether in writing Waiting and the different kind of thought process that changed throughout that, or writing Learning to Love Again, and seeing how we can grow throughout that being able to write those shifts and being able to kind of help put these things into words and put these and flesh out these characters throughout the different means was something I really enjoyed throughout the process.
I think the thing that was actually really gratifying for me was at the end of it all, taking all the music that we had and then editing it together to actually be able to hear the song how we want to hear it.